Run, run, run. They're afraid if they stay on the stage, I'll make them stay up here with me. And so they run as fast as they can. How are y'all doing today? Man, I'm going to be honest with you guys, that was bad. The first service rocked it when I said that, okay? So we're going to try that again, all right? How are y'all doing today? Oh, yeah, now that's what I like. Welcome. We're so glad that you are here today. We did a two-part series called The Giving God. If you were not here last week or you didn't have the chance to watch it online or go back and watch it, I would encourage you to go back and watch it. Pastor Mark talked about the spirit of mammon, and it was an amazing message. And I'm going to refer to it a few times in here. It's not like if you missed it, you're not going to follow this, but I would encourage you to go back and watch it. It was a really good message, okay? The older I get, the more I realize how important friendships and relationships are, and also how hard they are to come by. I had a lot of friends when I was younger, but as I've gotten older, I've realized that what really makes a real friend. There's not a whole lot of there's not a whole lot of great friends. You can't have 40 great friends. You're going to be limited in that, okay? And so if I were to bring you up here and say, okay, do you have a true friend? Do you have a real friend? I would hope that everybody in here could say yes, at least one or two friends. And then I would say, hey, what is it that makes a true friend? What is it that makes a real friend for you? And there's probably multiple characteristics and stuff, but one of the things I would imagine that every one of us hold to is the word trust. Okay, trust. We want to trust in that relationship. And a friendship is only as strong as the trust is. If you have strong trust, then you have a stronger relationship. And if the trust has ever been broken or violated or anything, it can be rebuilt, but it just takes some time to do that. It takes a little bit to do that. There's different levels of trust too. We have in our society, we trust all the time. When somebody recommends a restaurant and you've never been there before and you go to that restaurant, you trusted that person. All right? That it's gonna be a good restaurant. Had a friend last week that told me that I need to try a sandwich, a type of sandwich. Okay, you're not gonna get this at any restaurant, by the way. All right? But it's a sandwich of sweet pickles, peanut butter, and onion sandwich. Okay, yeah, that's what I did too. I'm like, ugh. You know, and here's what he said, that his grandfather introduced him to it because his grandfather went through the Great Depression. And they didn't have a lot of food, and that was one of the combinations that they tried, and it worked. Okay, here's the deal. I'm not going to try that. He did tell me in between services that he'll make me one, and I was like, that's about the only way I'll try it, and we'll see. All right, but we have different variations of trust. We trust people whenever they recommend a car dealership or a place to get a car repaired. Have you ever gotten in a car with someone before? There's an element of trust there, isn't there? You trust that person knows what they're doing. Have you ever taught your daughter or son driver's ed? There's a lot of trust there. Okay, but here's the thing: when you get in a car, whether you're the one driving or the other person's driving, you're trusting the brakes on that car. You're trusting the tires on that car. As you come to a stop sign or a stoplight, you're trusting that the car behind you sees you. Okay, there's some trust there. Have you ever flown an airplane? You don't even know who the pilot is, and you're trusting the pilot. You're trusting the mechanic that worked on that plane for 2 hours earlier. Okay, you're trusting the landing gear. There's so many different variations of trust that we have in our culture today. We just trust people. It's just part of our culture. But we also trust relationships. We trust relationships. And here's the thing, that the trust, how much we trust something is based on how much of a bigger risk it is. How big a risk it is. Let me visualize this for just a second. I'm not going to have anybody come up, so don't freak out. I'm not going to bring anybody up here, okay? But if I had somebody come up here and I said, okay, I just want you to stand right here and just kind of fall towards me, and trust that I'm going to catch you, and I'll just catch you. It'd be no big deal, would it? Okay. But then I said, okay, I want you to climb right up there on the top of that thing. Fall. I'll catch you. Are you going to do it? No, you're not going to do it. Okay? Because you don't trust me. And I don't know why. Why you would not trust me from that, but the trust is based on the risk involved. Every step may be a little different, but you get up to the top, it's going to be very hard to trust because there's a different risk involved. Our relationships are the same way. Our trust and our relationships are the same way. Look at this statement with me. The greater the trust, the better the relationship. The better the relationship, the greater the trust. It's like relationship and trust feed off of each other. If you trust somebody, the relationship will be better. The stronger your relationship is, the more you trust. And it kind of creates a never-ending cycle. And so there's a trust element there. So let me ask you this question. What about your relationship with God? Where does that fall? How's your trust in that relationship? You know, God created us for relationship. He created us to have a relationship. When he created Adam and Eve in the very early on, okay, the very beginning of time, he created Adam and Eve, and he created them, and the cool thing is, go back and read Genesis. It's awesome. They walked in the garden with God. Think about that for a second. Adam and Eve and God walking together in the garden. Wouldn't that be amazing? And he placed them in a garden, a perfect garden, a paradise is what he placed them in. Not Paradise, Texas, okay? He placed them in paradise, utopia, perfection. Everything was amazing there. It was great. And like when I read stuff, I like to visualize, okay? I like to visualize what it would be like today. Here's the deal. It'd be like God saying, Rocky, I'm going to place you in Cabela's. And everything in Cabela's is there for your enjoyment. But that one bass boat. And I'm thinking, dude, I'm perfectly fine because there's another bass boat right beside it, you know? I'm perfectly fine. It'd be like taking my wife and putting her in Target and saying, everything here is for your enjoyment except for that one Magnolia Market comforter. You cannot touch that Magnolia Market comforter. And I'm thinking, perfectly fine. If you have a kid, take a kid to a toy store and say, everything's here, and they're going to go crazy. Take a 16-year-old kid to a dealership and said, you can pick out any car except for that one car, that one truck right there, that smoke gray extended cab with the lift kit pickup truck. Maybe that's more about me than the 16-year-old kid. But anyway, if you put them in, that's what was going on right here. God placed them in the middle of a paradise and said, you can have it all except for one thing. Except for one thing. You can't enjoy that. And then something happened. Something happened in that garden. There was a violation of trust. Look what it says in Genesis 3. It says, and this is kind of after they've been placed in the garden and everything's great. The serpent was the shrewdest of all wild animals the Lord God had made. One day he asked the woman, did God really say you must not eat the fruit from any of the trees in the garden? Of course we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, the woman replied. It's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we are not allowed to eat. God said, you must not eat it or even touch it. If you do, you will die. You won't die, the serpent replied to the woman. God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. Next. So the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. So here's the deal. Middle of the garden, everything you could imagine at your discretion. I mean, you get to benefit from everything except for one tree. And they took a bite of the fruit from that one tree. So immediately the relationship went from walking through the garden with God, amazing relationship, to a non-existent relationship. The trust was gone. They made a choice. They made a choice to trust themselves more than God. And the great thing is God began immediately on a plan to restore that relationship, to restore the joy and the peace that disappeared at that moment. Here's the thing I want you to know. God's greatest desire for you is for you to have a relationship with him. And through that relationship, you experience joy and peace that only he can provide. And just like any other relationship, there has to be a point of knowing who they are. You have to have a relationship with that person. You need to be introduced to that person. And Jesus Christ is that person that we need to know. So if you're here today and you've never taken that step, you don't even know what I'm talking about, I pray and I ask that as we talk through today, that you begin to listen and ask questions. How do I have a relationship? How can I establish a relationship with Jesus? And at the end of our service, there'll be some people down here if you want to come ask questions or go into the hub about that relationship. But it's the beginning of a relationship where you begin to be restored back to where we were walking with God in the garden. That's where we need to get to. So, the risk is involved. What is the area you struggle with the most in trusting God? What is that area that you struggle the most? Here's for me, I don't struggle trusting God in areas of my life that I have no control over. It's the areas that I have control over. It's the areas that I can do something about. That's the areas that I trust myself and not God. That's where I struggle. And just like Adam and Eve, I choose constantly to walk away from that trusting of God. Since the very beginning, God has wanted what was best for us. And Adam and Eve chose the opposite. Now here's the deal. Felt like they were getting shortchanged. Felt like they were missing out on something. Felt like they knew what was best for their future. Isn't that us too? When we make choices, we choose because we think no one else cares as much about our future as we do. Now, does anybody know what next Wednesday at 3 o'clock, what's going to be happening next Wednesday at 3 o'clock? No, because y'all aren't there. You're not there. Here's the deal. God is. God's not limited to time and space. God is there. He knows what's going to happen. He knows what's going to happen in your life. And if he wants what's best for you, wouldn't it be smart to trust him? Because you have no clue. You don't have a clue of what's going on. But yet we still constantly struggle to trust him. Last week, Mark talked about some things that all of us, I have a tendency in this area. We did a poll, and we didn't do it. We got some information. And there was 2 things that everybody struggled with and stressed out about and worried about in our area. And it didn't matter if you're a Christ follower or if you didn't even believe in God. It didn't matter if you were a blue-collar worker or white-collar worker. It didn't matter if you're poor or you were rich. These are the things that we struggle with and we stress out about all the time. And the first one is this: financing the future, savings and retirement. Thinking about what's coming in the long run. We're stressing out about how we're going to take care of ourselves in the long run. Thinking about what's going to happen. We want to make the right decisions for that. By the way, you know God's already there. The next thing is this: day-to-day financial matters. We struggle to trust God in all those things because we want to control. We want to be in control of all those things. So I ask you this question: what is the one area that you struggle to trust God in? Statistically, most of us in this room, if not all of us, would say money. Would say finances. Finances are the things that we struggle with the most. It's why Jesus talked about it so much in the Gospels. As he taught the people, as he did his earthly ministry, he talked about finances all the time. It's why Satan comes at us and tempts us, just like he did Eve and Adam, to take a bite of that fruit, to trust ourselves or trust someone else. It's the reason Satan comes at us, because he understands that if we trust God, we'll experience joy and we'll experience peace. God truly desires to give to you. He wants you to have a healthy relationship. And we just talked about that just a minute ago. The one thing that we require in every healthy relationship is trust. So we trust God, not our money. Look at what it says in Matthew 6:24. Mark preached on this last week, and I would encourage you, like I said, to go back and he broke this down a lot more than we're going to do it right here. But it says, no one can serve 2 masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. Okay? There is going on inside of us a tug of war. There is a struggle going on inside of us to trust God or trust our money, to trust God or to trust ourselves. And if I were to ask you, do you trust God? Most of you would say yes. But evidenced with our life, most of us end up trusting our resources and our money more. Why is it such a struggle? Why do we fight this so much? Because we don't want someone to tell us, do we? We don't want someone to tell us how to handle our money. We don't want anybody to tell us, much less God. And this creates tension. It creates tension. But we talked about this last week. You'll hear this from the stage all the time. God doesn't want your money. He doesn't. God doesn't need your money. He doesn't need it. But what God wants for you is for you to trust him. He wants you to trust him because he knows that when you trust him, it restores back to you that joy and that peace that he wants for you. He wants to give you something, not take from you. So for the next several minutes, what I'd like to do is I want us to look at a passage in 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians was a letter that Paul wrote to the church at Corinth. And Paul, we've talked about before. He persecuted the church, hated Christians, hated the church movement. And so he was trying to persecute and kill and do whatever he could to eliminate it. And in the process of that, he met Jesus, and it changed his life. And he became one of the early church leaders. In fact, he wrote much of what we call the New Testament. And he wrote a letter to the church in Corinth. He actually wrote 2 letters. This is the second letter. And the crazy thing about this letter is it's a rebuke, okay? He's getting on to the church at Corinth. And he tells them about another church that's doing it right, all right? Which is kind of like, oh, wow, that's kind of mean. But anyway, he's talking about the churches in Macedonia. And this is what he says in 2 Corinthians 8:1. He says, "Now I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia." All right? He's talking about what God has done. He said, I want you to hear about what God has done in these other churches as he's talking to this church in Corinth. I love this because here's my desire, is that people are saying that about Grace Fellowship. I would love for people in our community and even beyond our community to say, you know what? Man, look at what God's doing through Grace Fellowship. Look at what God's doing for marriages. They're reuniting marriages. They're restoring families. They're investing in ministries, and they're investing in nonprofits in the area that are impacting people for Jesus. Look at what God's doing through Grace Fellowship. He's bragging about the churches in Macedonia and what they were doing for other people. Now, that's not part of the message. I just want to throw that in there, okay? That's freebie. I'm not going to charge you, okay? Look at what it says in 2 Corinthians 8:2. He starts talking about the church at Macedonia. He starts explaining who they are and what their characteristics are. He says, they are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor, but they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. Paul's talking about the church and the churches in Macedonia area. He's saying there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of struggles. There's a lot of trouble in the area. They're going through a lot of stuff. This is not a church that has everything going for it. This is not a church that everything's great and there's actually no problems at all. This is a church that's struggling. And chances are most of their struggle is because they believe in Jesus. And they're getting persecuted from the community. They're getting laughed at. They're getting kicked out of the community. They're dealing with all kinds of stuff. He's saying they've got troubles and they've got struggles. And then he goes on to say, and they are very poor. They were very poor. Now, this is not, you can't go to Chili's for lunch poor. All right? This is, you may not eat this week poor. This is, you may not have a home to live in poor. And so he's describing these people in the Macedonian churches as they're facing struggles and troubles, and they have no money, and they can't function. They don't have anything. They don't have what you have as a church, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then Paul says this, but they have struggles, they have troubles, and they're poor, but they have abundant joy. They have abundant joy. They're filled with joy. And this makes no sense to us. How could you be filled with abundant joy and be poor? How could you be filled with abundant joy and be facing all the struggles and the troubles that you're going through? How can you be filled with abundant joy? And the reason they were filled with abundant joy is because they had a relationship with God. And they trusted Him. They didn't trust their stuff. They didn't trust their money. They trusted God. And through that trust and through that relationship, they were filled with joy and peace. So, what was different between the church at Corinth and the churches at Macedonia? What's different between Grace Fellowship and the churches in Macedonia? He goes on to talk about this in 2 Corinthians 8, 2 through 5. It says, they are being tested by many troubles and they're very poor. We talked about that just a second ago. But they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. For I can testify that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more. And they did it of their own free will. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. They even did more than we had hoped, for their first action was to give themselves to the Lord and to us, just as God wanted them to do. There was something different than they were doing as a church in Macedonia area. There was a difference that they were making. There was something that impacted their life. There was something they were doing that impacted their life. They trusted God, and it made their life generous. So what I want us to do is I want to look at 3 characteristics of these Macedonian churches. And I want you to think about Grace Fellowship. I want you to think about you as we compare. The first thing was this: they were extremely generous. They were extremely generous. Look at this. This is just part of that verse. They overflowed with rich generosity. Okay? They had struggles. They were poor. They were filled with abundant joy, and they overflowed with rich generosity. Several years ago, about 15 or plus years ago, Jeremy, one of our pastors, the one that did the hosting just a few minutes ago, went on a mission trip to Kenya. And the organization he went with encouraged them to take hard candy like Jolly Ranchers and stuff, and you could pass them out to kids. And he was on his very last day, and he had one Jolly Rancher left, and there was one kid that he just really connected with that week. And so when that kid came up, he reached in his pocket and he gave that Jolly Rancher to that kid, kind of trying to sneak it so none of the kids would see it. And you know, if you did that here, the kid would probably put it in his pocket, or he'd open it up and put it in his mouth really quick. And that kid took that Jolly Rancher and took off running. And he went and found all of his friends, and he opened that Jolly Rancher, and he took a bite of a little piece, and he gave this kid one, and he gave this kid one, and he gave this kid one, and he gave this kid one. So instead of enjoying the whole Jolly Rancher himself, he was extremely generous. He was extremely generous. There is a connection between generosity and trust. There is a connection between generosity and joy. God wants to give you that joy. The Macedonian church was also willingly generous. Willingly. Man, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, there'd be a little, me and my brother would be getting an argument, or I'd be getting an argument with some friends or something like that, and it'd get kind of heated, and parents would step in or adults would step in, and grab you by the collar and separate you, and they would say, "You tell your brother you're sorry." I ain't telling him nothing. And you'd grit your teeth and go, "I'm sorry." And they would say, "You tell him like you mean it." I'm like, "You can't tell me to do that. It's in here. It's in my heart. I can't mean it. I don't mean it." But here's the thing with this. They were willing. They were willing to be generous. Look at this, what it says. They did it of their own free will. They gave. They were generous of their own free will. They weren't talked into it. They weren't manipulated into it. They weren't conned into it. They did it willingly. They wanted to do it. They were willingly generous. And then the last thing is this: they were eagerly generous. Eagerly generous. Look at this portion of the verse. Coming up next there. They begged us again and again. Here's Paul talking to the Corinthian church. He's saying they begged us again and again. They said, "Can we give? Can 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 we give?" Has anybody ever walked in here and said that? "Hey, would y'all please hurry up and pass the basket? Hey, can I give more money?" They understood that their giving gave them joy and peace. Their generosity gave them joy and peace. The Macedonian churches were generous. And then he brings it back to the church at Corinth. And he kind of tells them this is the connection piece here. And he talks about this in this passage. So we have urged you, Titus, who encouraged your giving in the first place, to return to you and encourage you to finish this ministry of giving. Since you excel in so many ways, in your faith, in your gifted speakers, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, and your love for us, I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving. I'm not commanding you to do this, but I am testing you how genuine your love is by comparing it with the eagerness of the other churches. You know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich. So he could make you rich. Here's what's taking place here that I absolutely love. He's comparing these churches. He's comparing these churches. In the Corinthian church, they're spiritually blessed far more than Macedonian churches. They have all kinds of spiritual blessings. But here's what's taking place, and Paul confronted them and said, this is what's happening in your life. Your spiritualness has not impacted your generosity. You feel like you're a good church because you're a spiritual church, but it has not transitioned, it has not moved you into your generosity. Verse 8, I love what it says right here. This is fun. I'm not commanding you to do this. Paul's saying, it's the Corinthian church, I'm not commanding you to give. I'm not commanding you to give. I'm not going to tell you to give, but I am testing how genuinely your love is by comparing it with the eagerness of other churches. I'm not going to tell you to give. I shouldn't have to. That's what he's saying. I'm not telling you to give. I'm not going to command you to give because I should not have to. Because if you truly were following Jesus, Jesus was a giver. All through his ministry, he constantly gave and gave and gave. And all the way up to the very end of his ministry, he gave his life on a cross so that we could have a relationship with God. You want to know what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus? It's a person that's generous. It's a person that is giving. But let me bring it back to one of the statements you've heard said here, and I've said it already. God doesn't need your money. God doesn't need your money. God doesn't want something from you. He wants something for you. He doesn't want to take. He wants to give because he knows what it looks like to trust him, and he knows what it looks like to trust our stuff or our money. And he knows that whenever we trust him, we receive joy and peace. But when we trust our stuff, we receive nothing. We need to trust God that he's going to take care of us. Not just for our eternal security. Not just so that we placed our faith in Jesus, we know we're going to get to spend our eternity in heaven. That's not what he's talking about. That's great. That's awesome. But he wants to give us that life now. He wants to give us that life now. God truly wants us to experience it. Look at what it says in Romans. It says, I pray that God, the source of hope, will fill you completely with joy and peace because you trust in him. Guys, we are constantly looking for joy and peace. And we're constantly looking for different places to feel that joy and peace. And he's saying right here, you will have joy and peace if you trust him. If you trust him, you will find that joy and that peace. Money promises it, but never delivers. God delivers it every time. Every time. So what is it you struggle with in your finances? Every one of us in here, there's a different element. If you're watching online, there's a different element. Some may be struggling, how are they going to pay the bills this month? Some of you may be trying to figure out how you can get your car fixed so you can get to work this week, or how you can buy a coat for your kid that keeps outgrowing everything. Some of you may be trying to figure out how you can retire early, or if you ever will be able to retire. But every one of us are in that spectrum somewhere where we're constantly thinking and we're worried about money. And God wants to free you from that. He wants to free you from that. He wants to release you of that tension and that stress and that anxiety. And he knows that freedom comes when we trust him with our resources, trust him with our life. About this time last year, maybe a little later in the year, I got a text message from a young man named Christopher, okay? And Christopher was dating my daughter at the time, and he texted me, he said, "Hey, Mr. Rocky," and I guess he thinks I'm old or something, but he said, "Hey, Mr. Rocky, can we have coffee?" And I remember it very vividly. He said December the 27th, and so we met and had coffee on December the 27th, and I knew what was coming. I knew it. Because I'd already told him he had to, but I knew what was coming. And we sat down and we talked, small talked for a little bit, and he said, "Mr. Rocky, I'd like to have your daughter's hand in marriage." And I'm telling you, he's great. It's a godsend. We've been praying for him for a long time for our daughters. We're so blessed. It's going to be amazing. And I was so excited for him. But you know what I started thinking immediately? Holy cow, I can't pay for a wedding. I can't pay for a wedding. I got the girl here, and dad's supposed to pay for the wedding. I can't pay for the wedding. There's no way we can afford a wedding. We can't afford a wedding. How can we afford a wedding? And immediately, a joyous occasion, the joy was gone. Because all I could think about was the money. And here's the deal. It didn't just affect me. It affected my wife, too. I began to see her lose her joy. And it affected my daughter because she was so worried about the money and making sure she could save money that she was not having a good time and enjoying the process. And God said, "Who do you trust? Who do you trust? Are you trusting your stuff? You trusting your money?" And I can tell you today, I got joy. I got joy. In 13 days, she's getting married. And you know the only thing I'm stressed about is I'm doing the ceremony. And I don't know if I'm able to make it through. I really, truly believe it may be the longest wedding I've ever done in my life because I'll probably cry all the way through it. But the joy is back because I'm not worried about the money. Satan wants you to worry about the stuff because it sucks the joy out of life. It sucks the joy out of life. And every time that we do that, we miss out on what God has for us. So how do we take a step? How do we take a step of faith? How do we take that step? Because in order to have a relationship, we need to trust. And in order to have a trusting relationship, there needs to be some element of we need to take a risk. What does it look like? How can we trust God and take a step in this direction? And everyone, I'm going to share 4 things really quick. 4 things, four givers. Every one of us in here fit in this category of a giver. Every one of us in here is one of these categories. And I'm not here to say, okay, you need to be this one, this one, this one. I just want you to identify where you are and see what your next step would be and if you're willing to take it. Okay? There's 4 categories. And what does it look like to take that next step? The first one is this. It's the nuns. You don't give anything. Okay? That's fine. I mean, that's fine. But you don't give anything. Maybe you come to church occasionally and you don't drop anything in the box when you leave. You don't do anything on the app. It's not even on your radar. Because you're just struggling to try to pay bills. Or you're trying to save up for something. Or maybe you're here and you've never even heard that through your generosity, you receive joy and peace. You've never been told. So you don't give anything at all. So you're none. That's okay. Maybe that's where you are. But maybe your step that you need to take of trusting God is to go to the next level, which is some. You give some. You give some. Maybe it's at the end of the month. All right? Maybe that's where you are right now. At the end of the month, if you have a little extra money, you'll give to the church. That's fine. Okay? Maybe that's just kind of what you do. Or you give at special occasions. You give, like the Thanksgiving meal bags, which is totally awesome. Okay? But you give to that. Or maybe it's the summer when we have kids camp or something. You sponsor a kid to go to camp. That's fine. That's where you are. But you don't want to extend yourself too much because it places you in a little bit of an awkward situation. So you give some. It's a step. If you're a nun, you give a step of some. But maybe if you give some, your next step needs to be to give steady. To give steady. And usually steady giving is more of a consistent giving. It's giving maybe a percentage and so you give a consistent amount each month. You get a paycheck and you give a little bit. I grew up in a Christian home, and we gave 10%. That was taught to me by my dad, okay? And so when I was younger, I'd get an allowance of $1. And yeah, the big bucks, I'd get $1. And when he gave me that $1, he'd walk with me into my room, and I'd get a dime out, and I'd put it in the envelope, seal the envelope, write my name on it, and I'd take it to church on Sunday, because that's what we did. That's the tithe, right? So it was taught to me. That's what I did. And it was no big deal when it was $1. But then when I got a real job, and maybe not a real job, not like a real job now, but I got a job because I had to pay for gas in my car, and I started looking at, I'm giving this amount, I could fill my car up with gas and be out with my friends all weekend. That's a lot more money. That's a little bit more of an issue. But you give steady, you give at a percentage. And my wife and I did this, we've always given 10%. But about 2 years ago, I read a book that rocked my world. Okay? Rocked my world, because this is what it did. It challenged me. It challenged me beyond the 10%, because what had happened is we've been given 10% for so long, we were perfectly adjusted to living off of 90%. There was no faith involved. There was no trusting of God anymore, because we had adjusted our lives to living off the 90%. And if giving is not about God needing money, but giving is about trusting God and growing our relationship, we weren't trusting God anymore. So we started praying about what is our percentage to give more, to take that step of still steady, but maybe it needs to be increased. And then the last one is this, it's sacrificial. This is the one that hurts a little bit sometimes. All of them hurt, honestly. But sacrificial means you're giving your steady amount, but then you're looking for opportunities to give. Like the Macedonian churches, they're looking for chances to give. They're looking for opportunities to help other people. You see somebody that you work with, and they're going to struggle to have a good Christmas, you and your family step in and take care of that family. It hurts a little bit. You struggle with it. It's difficulty. Now, here's the deal. If it may be, just like for us, a steady increase, a percentage increase is sacrificial. A steady increase is sacrificial. But now here's the difference between being sacrificial and being wise. No, okay? I'm not going to sit here and tell you where the level is. But if God tells you to give, the wise thing to do is give, because he's going to take care of you. And if he tells you to give and you give sacrificially, your relationship is going to grow, and you're going to trust more, and you're going to understand that relationship even better. When we trust God, our relationship with him grows, and in the midst of that, he pours inside of us. He fills our cup full of joy and full of peace. We want to be a sacrificial church. We want to be a church that is known for giving. And we've done this thing called Be Rich for years. If you've been around here, we would for 2 Sundays or 1 Sunday, we would have everybody give a portion, and it was completely up to y'all, and we would help other organizations in our community and nationally and internationally. We would help organizations. We don't want to do that once in a while. We don't want to do that once a year. We want to be a church that gives to those organizations all the time. We want to be a church like Macedonia, where we're constantly looking for opportunities to give and help organizations and other ministries and things that are impacting people for Jesus. And for this to happen, there has to be a relationship, and there has to be trust. So maybe today you're here and you don't really give anything. And a step of faith for you, a step of trust, would just to take one step and begin to give some. Not a whole lot, but just to give some. And you know what? That's awesome. That's your step you need to take. And I encourage you to take it. But maybe you're here today and you give some periodically. You give some at the end of the month, or you give some randomly. Maybe what you need to do is you need to take another step, and you need to begin to give steady, consistently, on a monthly basis. And I'm not saying start at 10%. I mean, if that would be awesome if you did, because I think God will honor it. But maybe you and your spouse, or y'all need to sit down and you need to think through, okay, maybe we need to start with 2% or 4%. That's a step of faith. You're taking a step. And when you trust God, it's growing your relationship. Maybe you're here today and you're giving steady. You're giving consistently. You're giving a percentage. Maybe today what you need to begin to do is you need to step out and you say, you know what? I'm going to take a step and I'm going to give sacrificially. I'm going to give sacrificially. I'm going to give sacrificially to above and beyond here at the church, but I'm going to also look for opportunities in our community. I'm going to look for chances. How can I help other people? Instead of hoarding, instead of trying to make sure that my future is taken care of, I want to begin to help other people, and I want to sacrifice. I want to go above and beyond, just like the church in Macedonia was doing. They were struggling. They were poor, but they were filled with abundant joy because they gave. Look at this statement one more time with me. The greater the trust, the better the relationship. The better the relationship, the greater the trust. God's desire is not for you to give him your money. God's desire is that your relationship with him would grow and that you would trust him more and you would grow in that relationship and you would be generous so that he could fill your cup full of joy and full of peace. So what kind of giver are you? What is your next step? What is it you need to do to trust God more? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this morning. Father, for just the conviction, the struggle, even in preparation of this message, Father. Father, I don't want to be someone that says one thing and does another. Lord, show me how to trust you, how to be a sacrificial giver, how to help other people. Help us to be that kind of church that is more concerned about reaching people for you and impacting our community than we are about anything else. Father, show us what it looks like to trust you. It's in your Son's name I pray. Amen.